God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. All right, we're supposed to get Campbell. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, that they may solve a common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution. Does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics achieve sobriety. Speaker at the Liberty Bell Roundup in Philadelphia, and I don't think he remembers me at all, but that's okay, because he probably sees tons of people, which I understand. But he came highly recommended as a good drunk, so I thought, you know what, let's invite him. So I'd like to welcome our speaker, Scott F.
I remember you. I walked by the table. You guys were Thank you, Deb. My name's Scott Fleming. I'm an alcoholic. I was getting lonely and lonelier at sitting at this table, as people were just disappearing. Kind of reminded me of my life when I was drinking. But of course I remember you, Debbie. I remember you guys at that back table and me walking by at the end, somewhere along the weekend, and you gave me the kind invitation, Karen and you, and it's great to see you, and I really I want to start off. I start every day on my knees, thanking my Creator for everything He took from me, for everything He gave me, and I ask Him to help me give everything away in the glory of His name, not mine. So in that spirit, I want to thank my Creator for allowing me to be here with you today sober first. Then I would like to thank the committee by way of Debbie and Karen for the kind invitation to come here and join you this weekend. And what I love conventions. Conferences, workshops. I love this. I found this early on in sobriety, and I'll talk about that. But I had some friends drive out with me, Louie and Anthony and Joe. So some home group members and some friends and some guys that I spend a couple days a week at my house just hanging out, talking about sobriety and life with. So thank those guys for coming up with me. And coming in here and running into people like right away that I knew. I'm 2 hours from my house, but for me being active and seeking and wanting to be a part of all of it that Alcoholics Anonymous has to offer, and then give that all back, I've met you everywhere. And I run into Michael, who I've met at the York conference, and it was great to see him, because we met once, and we had that intimate connection right away, and I'll never forget Michael. You know what I mean? Stan came up to me here, and it was a pleasure to see Stan. Every time I see him, this is, I've met you everywhere, and I've connected with you. Maria, and I can go, and Karen and I met at the conference in York. I can go on and on. And I love this life, and I love Alcoholics Anonymous. If a doctor told me tonight that I have a week to live, that I'm going to die in a week, I'm going to live that last week with a smile on my face. Because of the life you've given me, I feel like I've actually lived lifetimes in here for the last 15 years I've been with you. I don't want to die. I feel like I have a lot more to do in this life. But, man, I have been overpaid already. Bill talks about the joy of living in the 12th step of the 12 and 12. I love that, because I've come to realize what that means more in the last, I'd say 5 or 6 years. It has a lot to do with the hard times in life. It has a lot to do with the challenges, the heartbreak, the failures, the mistakes. Right? It's the whole spectrum of life that I've been given the courage to face life, all of it. And not want to pick up a drink, and have friends like you and learn and grow through all that. So I've been given that. And if you're new here tonight, I hope you find that. I hope you find people that have found that, and you hang out with those people. Because that's what happened for me, because I wasn't joyful when I got here. But it doesn't make sense if you look at my family, because I come from a really good family. My mother and father are the most non-judgmental, loving people I've ever met. By the way, thank you to the delegates, and thank you, Caroline, for coming up here, and thank you for your beautiful service to Alcoholics Anonymous. I aspire to be like you someday and be in that level of service and work my way up when the time is right. But I know how important that work is, and I commend you and thank you. My mother and father, I never heard them say one derogatory comment about another human being. And I love them for that. But they came out of the slums of Philadelphia and worked their way up and worked hard to give their kids a better life, and they did that. And they gave us education, and they got us involved with sports. I wasn't spoiled, but I was given every opportunity to have a great life. And I didn't have a perfect family, but I want to tell you that, anything one needed to grow up and live in a healthy environment, it was there. I have a brother that's a year and a half younger than me. And what I've come to realize is that the way my ism manifested itself before alcohol came into my life was that I like to put people down and feel better than them because I didn't measure up. And my brother was a year and a half younger than me, and he was the easiest target. And that boy, that beautiful boy, when he was born, took abuse from me till for years. I put him down. I put my hands on him. I called him disgusting names. I was so terrible to my brother that it would make me cry when I would think about it later on, like when he went off to college and I wanted to say, I wanted to say I'm sorry for the way I treated you, as you grew up in the house with me. I couldn't do it. And I would drink try to drink that away, and I couldn't. I would cry. The shame, the remorse, and the guilt. So I didn't measure up. I had this, I believe, exaggerated ego that made me feel afraid around you. So I would try to compensate to feel better than you. And alcohol at 13 years old came into my life like it comes in anyone's life. And I put it into my body, and the magic happened. Instantly, I felt connected. I don't know if I knew how disconnected I was until that night. I could hang out with the guys and feel like I was a part of. I could talk to the girls for the first time in my life, which I never could before. And alcohol, that very night, it was so profound that it became the most important thing in my life. I didn't drink every day from that moment on, but I thought about it every day from that moment on. And my thoughts were dominated by this. What older guys can I get to know that can get me booze when I want it? How can I get money, save money, rob my parents so I could save up to get alcohol? What's the keg party going on the weekend? Because I can't wait to get to that sense of ease and comfort our book so masterfully describes, because that's what it allowed me to feel. So everything else in my life became secondary. And it felt good. It felt like fun. It made me feel powerful. But I'll tell you this, I know it wasn't fun. Because I know what real fun is today from being sober and being with you and having real laughs. All right? But it felt great. I'm a feel-good kind of guy, so I ran with this. And I played a lot of sports in high school. I played 4 sports, and I was the one I did the best in was tennis. I was flown down to North Carolina my senior year to play in front of a coach, and I saw the way they partied on this college campus at 18 years. I was a senior in high school. We even stole a keg from the Raleigh Cricket Club from a wedding reception. One of the older guys on the teams, there was this keg that wasn't even tapped yet. We put it out in the bushes, called his buddy. His buddy came and got it, took it back. We went on with the match, and we went back to the dorm, pretend we were sleeping, and then we went out. And I drank all night long. And I knew that was the college I wanted to go to. When I graduated, I flew back home. I graduated by the skin of my teeth. They did offer me a partial scholarship. And, I'm not a good student. I'm like a D- student, which is tough because my mom's a teacher, right? But I graduated by the skin of my teeth, and I pick up a drink on graduation night, right? And I go on this bender throughout the whole summer, and I'm at my friend's house because his parents are gone, and I get arrested halfway through the summer. Now, I'm 18 years old. My mother and father already knew there was a problem with me and alcohol. They had been asking me to get help since I was about 16 and a half, 17. Right? But there's no way I'm going to let you take away the one thing that makes me feel comfortable in my own skin. No way. But I'm facing charges. And I wanted to go away to the school, so I thought if I go into rehab, I'd appease my mother and father, and the judge will be lenient on me. So I go into rehab at 18 years old with no thoughts I'm going to stop. But when I'm in there, I can't help but listen to these old guys in there, these old men. They were like 30, 40 years old, man. They were talking about things that they lost that I was about to embark on, like a scholarship, like an education, like a career. Like the one guy said his mother and father never got to see him do anything with his life before they died. And I could feel the shame and remorse. It was palpable. And I thought to myself, man, I don't want to end up like these guys. And I could also see that alcohol was too important to me at 18. I saw it, the truth for a second. And I said to myself, I want to make my mother and father proud. I want to take advantage of the scholarship. I want to play tennis. I want to get an education. I want to have a good career. And I set off to do that. And I didn't drink for 29 days. Man, the 30th day was my parents dropped me off at that college and drove away. I didn't know I had no defense against the first drink. I had no idea what I was up against. I thought I was not going to drink, hang out with the guys that don't drink, play tennis. And the guys on the tennis team came up to me that night. And I wouldn't have drank, but they asked me the wrong question that night. They said, you want some beer? I said, yeah, give me a 6-pack of Bud Pounders. And they came back with that beer, man. I cracked that tall boy. I put it to my lips, and it went down into my system, and it went into my bloodstream, and my eyes watered up, and I got that feeling that I love right here in my head. I remember thinking, what was I doing not drinking for 29 days? This is the best feeling in the world. And I couldn't stop drinking that night. It was 4 a.m. Everyone else is in bed, and I can't stop, and I'm calling my aunt. A phone call I'd be ashamed of for a long time. And I'm crying to her on the phone. Why'd I pick up a drink? Why can't I stop? I didn't want to drink. And I came to the next day, and it was on. I couldn't, they say, picking up a drink's like having sex with a gorilla. It's not over till the gorilla says it's over, Within a year and a half, I was out of that college. Never did I play one match of tennis. I'm 19 and a half years old, and I'm more confused, more alone. I'm drinking more and more and more. I can't get the same effect. The magic is wearing off, right? This is like the cruel part of alcoholism. I'm no longer having fun and fitting in and talking to girls. I'm now antisocial. I'm in my room. Nobody wants to be around me. I can't get a roommate because I get in fights with everybody, and I'm not a fighter, So, I called home, and I have great parents, and they fly me back home. I also had the dean and had me in his office, and he said, if you don't leave, we're going to press charges and arrest you. That kind of helped. So I fly home. I enroll in Bucks County Community College. I would have been the #1 tennis player there. They have a great team. And within a week or two, I can't even go to class or school anymore. I'm stopping off in the woods, drinking with the guys that drink like me. And I give that opportunity away, like I do many opportunities in my life. And the next 10 years of my life, I live it meaningless and purposeless. Did I have DUIs and get locked up? That all happened, but that's not what I want to talk about, man. I want to talk about how meaningless and purposeless and hopeless, my life was. And the fact that my sister is 10 years younger than me. And I love my sister, man. When she was born, I fell in love with her. And now in her most important years, I'm an animal in the house. I'm taking the family hostage. Alcoholism's progressing in me. I'm a monster. I'm bringing dangerous things into the home, putting them in danger. I'm abusive, right? And this is the way I'm living. And my parents are begging me to leave, and they kicked me out. And I barge my way back in. I'd take friends hostage and bounce around on their couches. I would get apartments with good jobs. Next thing I know, I'm getting paid good money and the lights are out. I can't pay the utilities. And I got the landlord knocking on the door saying, you got to go. You haven't paid your rent in 3 months. I could never hold down an apartment in my 20s. Go back to mom and dad. They let me in begrudgingly, and then they begged me to leave again. I took a girl hostage for 8 years. I used to say it was a girlfriend. It wasn't a girlfriend. She loved me and cared about me. I took advantage of her, man, drugged her through my alcoholic life, used and abused her. I could not love her. And this is the way I lived, In my late 20s, see, my mother is a teacher, and I have good parents, and they always knew something was wrong with me. So they had me in front of counselors and therapists and psychiatrists and psychologists my whole life. I've been on stuff, off stuff, on stuff my whole life. And I really thought I was schizophrenic in my late 20s. I was starting to hear things and see things. I'm up for days drinking. I had read something that hit you in your late 20s. I got this thing. Plus, I'd rather it be that than tell me it's the booze. So I'm on meds. I'm in front of a doctor. See, I think I have schizophrenia. And I'm here to tell you that I don't have schizophrenia. Man, I thought there's anything wrong with that, but I had untreated alcoholism. And I didn't know there was a way up and a way out. And don't tell me you're going to take away my booze. No way. I couldn't imagine life without that. Then I wanted to die. Could no longer hold down a job, bouncing around virtually homeless. And I wanted to die. I would wake up disappointed. Like I would come to disappointed that I had to make it through a day with the suffering, the degradation, the humiliation, the loneliness, the confusion. And I don't know why. See, because a lot of times off these loads, I would often think about that rehab. But I guess the pain wasn't great enough. And this one day, man, I'm 29 years old, and I'm drinking at the Bristol house with a friend, and, she's pointing things out to me that, that are hitting me. And I remember saying, tomorrow I'm going to do something about it. Now, I said that millions of times, And I came to the next day, and for some reason, the realization of my life came to me. And I was in great pain, and I cried out just to help. And the tears came down, and that rehab came to my mind. And I made the phone call this time. And I called them up, and they said, I said, I want help. And they said, all right, well, come on in. I said, can I come in on Monday? Because it was Friday, And they said, no, come on in now. And I guess the pain was great enough. I went in. And I didn't answer the questions, honestly, about how much I drank or what I did, because I wanted intensive outpatient. I didn't want inpatient, right? And they gave me this intensive outpatient 4 to 9 every day. And I'm going there. I'm feeling safe at this intensive outpatient because I'm shot at and hurting from booze. But there was one problem. They wanted you to make meetings. I didn't want to make meetings. I thought, how could this be any fun? Bunch of, old people hanging onto your chair real tight, commiserating, making it through a day without a drink or a winner. And I was at one meeting when I was the courts, they made me go to meetings when I had my DUI, and I went to a half a meeting. It was so smoky, right? I mean, you didn't have to worry about anonymity because you couldn't see anybody, I went with my brother. I said, we're out of here. And my buddy was in AA, and I had him sign all my rest of my court. So I did not think this was going to be any fun. I couldn't imagine being around people like this without drinking. I wasn't going. But after about 10 days of being in this outpatient and a whiteboard of all the meetings people made, like Susie made 5 over the weekend at Clubhouse, Bob made 2, Scott 0. You know what I mean? And I kept giving these excuses, and the dentist, the counselor, one day said, stay after, I want to talk to you. And he said, Scott, if you don't make meetings, you can't be a part of this group. And I was afraid to not be a part of that group because I was afraid I would drink. So I was nudged into Alcoholics Anonymous by this counselor. And I walked into the Greater Levittown group of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I sat on the back wall, and I was scared to death, and I was depressed, and I watched, and this lady, Deb G., started to take control up at the desk and read some stuff. She introduced this speaker, Larry A. from Pendel. Larry A. spoke, and as he spoke, I listened to him like only a dying could. I was not on my cell phone, thank God. I've never been on a cell phone in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous in my life. I hope I never am. I understand this is life or death for me and the people around me, and I want to give reverence to this life-saving, life-enriching place. And here's what happened from paying attention to Larry that night is as he spoke, a few things happened to me. One, he drank exactly the way I drank, which is so important in here. He spoke my language, right? Number 2, he seemed like relatively happy without drinking anymore. And number 3, and most importantly, I believed him. And I got hope instantly. When I see Larry to this day, I always remind him, thank you. You're the first speaker I heard in Alcoholics Anonymous. You gave me hope. And they surrounded me in that meeting because I put my hand up as the first time there. Tall Paul, he's like 7'5". He came right up to me, boom, with his big hands. And I always tell him, too, you're the first person that shook my hand and welcomed me in. They invited me to the basement because they play music down there. And I remember just feeling like I was home, like I belonged right away. And you guys welcomed me in. And, man, I fell in love with the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous that night. And I haven't fallen out of love with it. That's just my experience. I know it's not everyone's. I know it's not everyone's because that very night, as I left that meeting, walking down the handicap ramp at that clubhouse, Frank was walking up. And Frank was complaining about these meetings under his breath. Like, I guess if I go to these meetings, I'll stay sober. Frank, God bless him, to this day can't stay sober. I got into my little car. That's all I had left. I drove to my parents' house, right? Now my parents invited me into the home because I admitted I had a problem going to AA. I mean, I think my parents want me to live with them today with what have done with me. I came back to that clubhouse every single day. Meetings at 9, noon, 5:30, 8, and midnight. I was out of my mind in the beginning. I couldn't work. I went to every meeting all day long, stayed at the clubhouse during club time, in between the meetings, and talked to my hero, who would become my heroes, like Adam T. with 42 years. Called all the new guys cakes, right? The guys that were interested in getting to know him, and I was at that man's funeral, man. Bob C. had 45 years. He heard everybody's feelings in that meeting, and he heard mine plenty of times. But I'm glad he was there. He was a rock. He was a pillar. And I learned later on what those things were about, allowing my feelings to get hurt as he would share about what I just shared, how it was, didn't make any sense, or, it was ridiculous, or grow up, or whatever he would say, right? Nancy K., 35 years, one of my heroes in Alcoholics Anonymous. And these long-timers, man, I soaked it up and learned everything I could from them. And I got involved right away. Like, I started to chair meetings. I cleaned your ashtrays. I'm not a smoker. I made your coffee, and I don't drink coffee. I branched out to other meetings. I had a pocket full of guys' numbers. We would go to diners afterwards, and we would talk about the wonderful things we heard in these meetings and how our lives might change. I got involved with, like, right away. Like, I started to go to your business meetings, which were very interesting, I became the alternate intergroup rep at 2 months or 3 months of sobriety. Sarah, the intergroup rep, drinks after a couple months. I'm now 4 or 5 months sober and intergroup rep. I'm in that level of service in Alcoholics Anonymous. I left our females alone. There was men and women in that meeting that talked about being a man of honor and dignity, like Bob B. and John B., who become my sponsor later. They talked about these things, and they carried themselves this way, of things that I've always secretly craved but never could be. And also, like Deb G., you knew you weren't going around her girls, you know what I mean? So that kind of helped. Like, I followed these men, and I did everything Alcoholics Anonymous asked me to do, every single thing, except for 12 things. And my life got so good so quick externally, it's ridiculous. I don't know what your dreams are. Maybe you don't have them. I have dreams. I've always had dreams. And I won't apologize for them standing here today. Since I was a kid, and growing up, I always wanted to be a good brother, a good son, a good friend, a good student, a good guy in the community. I never could be those things. Other dreams I had that were less important but still dreams, they were still a part of me, is I always wanted to travel the world. Since I was a kid, I was fascinated with globes and maps. When I was 15, I said to my mom, I just want a map of Europe, but I never went anywhere. I was too afraid to live. I couldn't get off the bar stool. And anyone that did live or had a successful life, I hated them, and I knocked them down. Like my brother, man, he's younger than me. He worked hard, saved his money, traveled Europe, traveled Asia. I hated him for it. My mom, late in her career, she's a teacher, worked hard, saved, went around the world, invited my brother, never invited me. I hated her for it, man. And I won't be that guy in AA, man. I'm your cheerleader. I hope your life goes wildly successful. Wildly successful. I hope you come here and share about how good it is. Back then, I couldn't be like that. So, of just coming around, being in service, loving AA, being a part of the fellowship, making meetings, here's what happened to me. At a couple months of sobriety, that hostage that cut me off cleanly, wouldn't answer my calls, the knocks on her door. She threw me into a panic attack because she was for 8 years, she was my security blanket. She's calling me. I heard you're sober. I'm like, yeah. She's like, I'm going to AA. She goes, I want to see you. I ran off and made the fake amends to her, right? The one that later she would deserve when I got to 8 and I knew what I did to her, right? But my sisters called me a hero to her after a couple months of sobriety. My mom and dad are showing me off to the family. They're like, look at Scott, our son. He's back. Look at his eyes, his skin. He's back. My brother, at 5 months of sobriety, says, let's go to Ireland. Now, one of the things I learned quickly in here is that something that we get in here, in fact, I think it's a responsibility, is that when we get sober, we get to find out what our gifts are that God gave us. One of them for me is that he gave me a mind for business. And early on in sobriety, I had a little business going. I had a checking account that was positive for the first time in my life. My parents would let me live there rent-free, so money's building up. I made another little investment that did well early on. And I had money in the bank. My parents were in love with me. And then I came across a meeting list for all the meetings in Ireland. Shortly after my brother asked me that, in the literature class, I thought, that's a sign to go. So we planned this trip. And at 6 months of sobriety, I go to Ireland for 10 days. I get off the plane in Shannon, Ireland. I knew right away it was going to be hard. Now I'm walking around with my brother. I'm looking over the ring of curry. I'm thinking, why can't I have a few beers with my brother? Why can't I? I'm making meetings. I'm calling people in my home group about the drink that's on me. I'm journaling about this drink, and I'm not a writer. Fourth day, and I end up in a restaurant, and dining goal, my brother orders a beer, and I want to drink so bad it hurts. And I would have drank if it wasn't for my brother. But I abused him my whole life, and he knew I was a sober member of AA. I said, Will, I got to get out of here. And we left, and we went to the bed and breakfast, and I went into the bathroom of that bed and breakfast, and I didn't know what to do. I closed the door, but I had heard in here at some point in your sobriety, the only thing between you and the drink will be God. I didn't know what that meant, but thank God I listened in here. And I paced in that bathroom, and I dropped on my knees because I didn't know what else to do. And for the first time in my life, I'm on my knees. And I'm saying, God, I want to drink, but I don't want to drink. Please help me. I didn't drink. But what's more than that is I didn't want to drink after I got off my knees. That's the first time that ever happened to me. Since I was 13 years old, booze owned me. I was a slave to it. In my 20s, from 25 to 29, I drank against my will. I had my little crappy life with no license because I got it taken away. I never restored it. So I lived at mom and dad's. And when they didn't want me there, I walked to the Edgeley Inn as I had odd jobs here and there. And I cry on the way under the bar, and I wipe my tears off, and I walk in and I order because I had to go drink. Didn't want to, but I had to. And now I'm free. I even flew to Glasgow on my own in Scotland. I'm walking around the streets of Edinburgh, Scotland, and the bar lights were flashing, which to me are the most attractive things in the world. And there was no pool. There was no I wish I could. I was free. I flew back to Dublin to meet up with my brother. We get on the flight home. And now on the flight home, I'm interested in Alcoholics Anonymous a little more because something happened to me. So I had your big book, but I wasn't doing much with it. There was a man trying to sponsor me named Jimmy Wah. When I first got into the Greater Levittown group, he looked at me one day and said, Scott, don't you think guys with 5 years of sobriety need guys to stay sober? And I thought I'd do him a favor and let him sponsor me, But I wasn't receiving the gift he was trying to give me. So I fly home, I open up the big book, and it happens to be We Agnostics. I see, and the first lines my eyes see are, guys, everything or is nothing. He either is or he isn't. What's your choice to be? And I knew he was. And I knew I would be okay for the rest of my life if I depended on him. Now, that's all I ever really wanted in life was to feel okay. Alcohol came close, but it wasn't real. This was real. And I knew with everything in my being. And this intuitive thought came to me with this feeling or this inspirational thought. It said, Scott, when you get off this plane, you go see that man that when he was in your home group, you were afraid of him but attracted to him at the same time. And that was John B. And John B., when he would be in my home group, I loved it. I felt safe. He had a presence about him, a peace about him. When he shared, it came from somewhere deep. But I also was afraid of John because he could see right through me. And I wasn't doing your work. And if you got to know me, you wouldn't like me. I wasn't worthy. But I knew I had to go see him or I was going to drink again. So I get back to my home group after I get off that plane. And I would sit over there and he would sit over there. And I kind of move myself closer to him. Like after 2 weeks, I was right next to him. And one day he said to me, do you want me to sponsor you or something? I said, John, I never thought you'd ask. You know what I mean? That's like asking another man to be your Valentine. It is not easy, right? And he picked up on that. And I allowed this man to take my hand, and we walked down this path that I'm still on today. And because I trusted John a little bit, I started to do things that on my own did not look like a good idea. What I didn't realize was that although I thought I was getting, because I was getting physically more sober, and my life around me was getting better, and I'm living a dream. I'm in Ireland. I never traveled the world ever in my life, and here I am 6 months, that I thought I was getting better, and I wasn't. I was worse. I was worse, because what I didn't tell you is that in those 6 months, there'd be times like I'd be with my dad watching a Phillies game thinking, this is great. I'm spending quality time, sober time with my dad. But if I could have a couple beers, like 3 or 4 or 5, and like stop it, you know what I mean? If I really could do it, it'd be better. I'd be at a family reunion at 4 or 5 months sober. I mean, you know, not people placers. I'm at a family reunion. And my cousin's drinking a Bud can, and the ice is going down the can, and I got one eye on the can and one eye with. I'm not present with him. Alcohol had me up here, and I didn't realize that that's where the problem centers. So I start doing the inside work with John that's going to free me of that. And here's my experience with that. I was afraid. I was scared to death to do this stuff. But I had John with me, man. And we got on our knees. We said that third step prayer. And he told me what it was about. He said, this is an all-in deal, Scott. One day at a time for the rest of your life. Girlfriend or no girlfriend. Wife or no wife. Money or no money. Job or no job. Health or no health. There's no more drinking. You're walking this way with God and us. So you in or out? I said, I'm in. I get on my knees with him. I get off my knees. He says, write the 4-step out of the big book. I drag my feet. He has to remind me what I did in the third. He said, say a prayer. See what happens. And I literally said, God, one day as the date was approaching, because he set a date for me for the 5th, because I was dragging my feet. I said, God, this does not look like a good idea to me. But if it is, I ask you for the courage to write. And I put my pen on that paper, and it didn't stop writing for 2 hours. I was done. I called him up. He laughed, because he knows the power of God. And we met in the parking lot on that Saturday of my home group. And we went into the park. And in that park, I got spiritually naked with God and my sponsor. Defenseless. I was totally vulnerable. I held nothing back that I could think of. I allowed another man to show me the truth about me for the first time in my life. And here's what I found out. I mean, we did the whole, resentments are fatal and futile, and I could see I had a bunch of them, and fear, I get it. It's me relying on me, and God's infinite. I get all that. But you know what he really showed? He said, Scott, why would people want to be around you? I said, I don't know, maybe if I'm funny. He said, no, how about if you're honest? And as I looked at my 4-step, I already knew I was a liar since the day I was born and met you. I exaggerated. I told you stories. I had to one-up you so that you would approve of me, or so often I could feel superior to you. And he said, Scott, you're not superior. You're one of. And if you want a life with where booze isn't in your life, and you want a life where you feel connected to people and they feel connected to you, you got to practice the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous, which are the opposite of your character defects. One day at a time with God's help. And we walked out of that park. I mean, we had a nice long talk, but this is what I really remember. And he said, Scott, I'm your sponsor, but I'm human. I'm fallible. He said, God is infallible, all-powerful, infinite knowledge and wisdom. He said, thank you. He said that's the most important relationship you have. Isn't that what Sam Shoemaker told Bill Wilson in their history? Sam said, when you see the man with the problem, put his hand in the hand of him who has all the answers. Then go home. Don't stick around and play God. My sponsor put my dependence in its proper place. Now, I need you. But ultimately, my dependence has to be with my Creator. And he sent me home with that. And he said to take the hour. And I went home. I took the hour the book says to take. It's no big deal, right? Pull the book down and do an hour. Well, I sat there, and it was the best hour of my life. I reflected on what we talked about in the park. I reflected on my life, the way I've been living it. And in that hour, in that meditation, somewhere, I don't know where, instantly I felt his presence. And I knew I was forgiven by God for everything that I had started to take responsibility for in the park with him and my sponsor. Now, I knew I had more work to do with the world, and I still do today. But I knew God forgave me. I had a clean slate. The shame melted away. I haven't felt shame since. A peace came into me that hasn't left me since. And from that moment to this moment, I haven't wanted to drink. And I know why. Because Alcoholics Anonymous went from my head to my heart. It's no longer neck up. It was right here. So words you've never had to hear either of my sponsors say. After about 8 years of being sober, 9 years, I went to Vance S. from West Philly. I've been working with him for the last 6-7 years. Neither of these men have ever had to say to me, who are you helping? Because when it goes here, it wants to come out. It has to come out. It has no life unless it comes out. The experience wants to keep experiencing itself, right? And I left that hour and I went to my home group that night, and I remember, here's the fifth step promise that's coming true in my life. I'm looking at my friend Elena's eyes, and for the first time in my life, I realized I'm in another human being's eyes. I don't want to leave him. Now, before that, I hung my head around you. I stared at your shoes. If I had to look in your eyes, I was uncomfortable. Not that night. I was clean. And something else very important happened to me that night. I took a man named Bill home after the meeting who is schizophrenic. Bill doesn't dress like me. Bill doesn't bathe regularly. Bill will never hold a job. Bill will never have a license. Bill's been picked on his whole life. But I know how to help that guy. Because I already told you, I had the best parents I've ever met. I watched my mother share her gifts throughout her whole life with the underdogs, with the less fortunate. So I knew how to be nice to Bill and pick him up and bring him to a meeting or buy him a meal because he had no money. I knew how to sit next to Bill in a meeting and tap him, yo, bud, how you doing? You know, it's going to be all right. I could do all that. But I had nothing real in the way of our program to offer Bill because I wasn't taking your steps. But that night I had something extra. I took your fifth step earlier in the day. So on the way home, I said to Bill, do you have a sponsor? I said that to Bill because I wanted him to experience what I did earlier in the day. And he said, yeah, you. And I said, I'll take you as far as I can, Bill. And the next day we were looking at the first few steps, which I knew very little about. But I'm trying. All right? And I tell Bill to write a 4-step, and I have to actually give him a guide. And he's afraid to write. And I remind him what he did in the 3rd step. And Bill writes his 4th step. And I end up in a park with Bill to listen to another man's 5th step. And what an honor that is. What an honor. And as I'm in that park with Bill, listening to his 5th step, tears come rolling down my cheeks. Because for the first time in my life, I was unconditionally in love with another human being, man. I would have spent as much time as it took in the park for Bill to know God's real, for him to know he's forgiven, for him to know he never has a drink again, for him to have a purpose like I did with him in the park that day. And that's been my purpose ever since. It's the reason why I come back to Alcoholics Anonymous. And here's what happened to me from having a guy right behind me. See, I ran out and made all my amends. The easy ones. You know, like the ex-girlfriend, my financial ones were easy. I had 2 businesses going. I drove around and bought like $500 cars off the long timers. 86 Mercury Lynx with a push-button radio, with the roof hanging down with no heat. By the way, as I think about that, I still haven't ever been happier than I was at that time. $800 Saturn, and so I can make all my financial amends. And I stand here not knowing of anyone I owe a dime. Because that to me was simple, because it wasn't intimate or personal. It was a business transaction. I took $500 from you. I owe you $500. And I know how important it is. I got to make all my amends. But the hard ones for me were my family. But I had Bill catching up to me. I had Bill on his 8-step list. So I cared enough about Bill to stay 1 step ahead of him. And I prayed for the willingness as our 8-step guides us to. And what happened? The courage. I knew the day. It was given to me. Call your brother and make that the hardest amends you ever had. I called my brother. And I go and see my brother after I set this up. And I cried like a baby. No, I couldn't get words out for 5 minutes. I don't think he knew what was going on. You know? And I settled down. I made that amends. And I owned the way I treated my brother for all those years. I took responsibility for it. And afterwards, he stood up and said, Scott, I don't know if I could ever be as honest as you were right there. And I said, Will, I don't know how you don't hate me. He said, I know what those things were about, Scott, and all is forgiven. I hugged my brother, man. I left his apartment that day in Center City, Philadelphia. I drove back home to Bristol, and on that way home, I realized that I had a relationship with my brother for the first time. I had not been drinking or hurting him for many months, but I didn't have a relationship with him until I looked him in the eyes, owned it, and said, how can I make it right, and began that process. A few months after that, my brother asked me to take him to the 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he's not an alcoholic. But I guess he wanted more, and I guess he saw what AA did with his brother. So we sat down, and I told you I'm not all my family are teachers. I'm no student. I learned nothing in school. He's a history teacher. We sat down. He gave me a history lesson every Sunday for 6 months, hours, and I learned some history. And then I began to take him through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. We go back and forth, and I took him to the history of AA, which I love and which he loves. He loves more than most people do in AA. And I got to listen to his fifth step in his apartment in Philly, and his fourth step was a joke. Like, there's like a couple people, like he had his wife annoys him sometimes. You know what I mean? We looked at it from an entirely different angle. You know, he saw where he was selfish and considerate. You know? But my brother really did. He lived like such a good, fair, decent life. I don't know how he did it, but he did it. But there was one name on there that my brother harmed that he could think of. One person in his life. His ex-girlfriend from North Jersey from 12 years prior, he cheated on her and left her, which is very uncharacteristic of him. And he always felt guilty about that. Hasn't seen her since. And I said, put her on your 8-step list. Someday you got to make it right. Now, I didn't say go find her, because he's not an alcoholic. He's not going to drink and die if he doesn't, right? But I said, someday you got to make that right. And I don't know, 4 or 5 months go by, I get a text message, ran into Sarah at the Austin airport, made amends, incredible. I get on the phone with my brother. He says, Scott, you're not going to believe it. He's visiting my sister in Texas. His flight gets delayed. He's walking through the airport. He locks eyes with the one person on his 8-step list, Sarah. He makes the amends. She forgives him. He says it's the best experience he ever had in his life. I showed my brother how we live in 10, 11, 12 because to me it's a way of life, a dance with God. It's not about mechanics or study. We do that, but that's not the essence. And he moved to New Zealand, and when he had his son, and I got to meet my nephew for the first time. I flew to New Zealand, my mom, my sister, and my aunt, to meet my beautiful nephew. And my brother and I took a ride. He says, yeah, I set up an amends for the following week with my sister-in-law. I could see the way I reacted to her could affect the relationship with my son and my wife, and I don't want that to happen. And this guy is working the program faster than I am. It's enriching his life and those around him. And isn't that what AA is all about? I was never a grandson, so you guys told me go be a grandson. I could care less about my grandmother. She was 85 years old with a walker, but you told me go show up in her life. And I did that. And I would sit there in her senior citizens home, and I would play cards with her that I don't necessarily really like, but I would spend time with her. And I got to know my grandmother and what she liked to do, her hobbies and her life, and she got to know me. By the way, that's all they wanted to do is time and get to know you. And I found out that she likes to go to Lang City, so I would take her to Lang City for like day trips. Like she'd be down there about 8 hours, right? Spend $20. You know? I'm not a gambler, big gambler, so I bring spiritual books, read in the casinos. But one of these trips, on the way home, I said, Grandma, if you hit big, what would you do? She said, I know exactly what I'd do, Scott. I'd hire a driver to take me up to New England before I die, where I was born and raised, but I know it'll never happen. Well, I told you I was making all my financial amends, and a funny thing happens when you do that. We don't do it because of this, but we find out on the back end that you can actually keep money and it can grow. Right? Because all money is energy, right? And when we balance the books with the universe in the financial sense, we then deserve it. And it grows. And guess what happens? From the time my grandmom said that, I knew I wanted to do it with her. And about 6 months later, I called my grandmother up. I said, Grandma, remember that trip you talked to me about? She said, what trip? I said, the one in New England. She said, oh, I remember. I said, I want to do it with you. She said, what do you mean? I said, I want to do it with you. She said, Scott, I'm old with a walker. You wouldn't have any fun. I don't have any money. I said, Grandma, I want to do it with you. She said, I would need my own room, Scott, and you won't have any fun. I said, Grandma, I want to do it with you. And she let me take her. I picked up my 86-year-old grandmother. We went up to New England for 8 days. Lisbon, New Hampshire was the first stop where she was born and raised, and where we, and it was in the autumn because she wanted to go when the leaves changed. And we were up there, and her 91-year-old brother, 84-year-old sister, all day. The next day was my favorite day, her 86-year-old best friend. Man, they didn't think they would ever see each other again. They laughed and cried all day, told stories. I laughed and cried. I took her to the field she used to run and play, and where she had her first kiss, the church she was a part of, where she went to school. I mean, we had a blast. We stopped at the nudist colony in Massachusetts on the way home. She wanted to dip in, We took pics and everything. I mean, she lived life to the fullest. I think I told her I liked this trip a little too much because she asked me to take her to Wisconsin the following year, Well, we get home from that trip and my grandmother falls ill and she dies. And she had 7 children. One of being my mother, and they all came up to me and told me from the day she got back from that trip to the day she died, all she wanted to do was talk about that trip. And on her deathbed, she wanted to show the photo albums because we took so many photos and had so much fun. And they asked me to say the last words at her funeral. And not too long before that, I wasn't allowed around the family, or if I was, they looked at me funny or didn't trust me. And now they're giving me that honor. So thank you, Alcoholics Anonymous, for allowing me to be a part of my grandmother's last wish on earth. And that is my favorite trip I have ever been on. The dreams of travel for me have come true in here. Not way to go, Scott. Way to go, God, and way to go, Alcoholics Anonymous. But because of God and Alcoholics Anonymous, I've been given the opportunity to visit 60 countries, 6 continents since I've been sober. 95% of it has been inside Alcoholics Anonymous. I learned how to surf at Waikiki at the Hawaii Convention of Alcoholics Anonymous with 500 other friends, where I'm on a volcano at 4 in the morning, and as soon as the sun breaks over the horizon, you break into the Lord's Prayer and have a meeting up there. I got tears in my eyes at a year sober, right? I learned how to ride elephants in Thailand and allowed the Thailand Convention of Alcoholics Anonymous with 2 of my best mates in AA that never left Philly, and now we're traveling the world together. I learned how to scuba dive in Indonesia, the Bali Roundup of Alcoholics Anonymous with a bunch of my mentors from all over the world. I learned how to ride camels in the Sahara Desert. Because you know what words I've heard in here that I never heard before I got here? 9 times I heard, Scott, would you be the best man at my wedding? Joe was one of them right there. Thank you for that honor, Joe. I heard those words 9 times. I never heard those words before I got here. 3 times I heard these words. Would you be the godfather of my son? I never heard those words before I got here. And my good friend Pete, who I went to Thailand with and traveled the world with in AA, asked me to be the godfather of his son. And I'm the only, but the problem is he met the woman from Moldova, and the family lived in Portugal, and I'm the only one that showed up. He couldn't thank me enough. Man, and those Moldovans have a wild ceremony with the christening. They throw the baby around stuff, I took it back, little Pete, I spiraled little Pete. That was amazing. They have a wild ceremony where they throw the baby around the room. It's crazy. But before I go there, I fly into Madrid. I always wanted to go to Africa, and I go down into Morocco, and he was supposed to go with me. He didn't come. I would later find out why. And I'm in Morocco alone. I'm a little scared. It's a little, there's no English anywhere. I'm also going through a tough time emotionally, a little breakup situation, a little tough time. And I'm in the desert in Marrakech for 3 days in the Sahara Desert with nomads, sleeping under stars. First day in, I end up at a little resting spot with drinking some water, and a Moroccan man, his wife, and his baby come through on a camel, and they sit down and get some water too, and we start a conversation. Now, I always talk about AA when it's appropriate, because AA gave me life, and it was appropriate. I started telling about my life. We're sharing back and forth. They don't know what I'm talking about. What AA? She looks at me and says, is this like a change in consciousness thing? I said, yeah, it is. He looks at me and says, what is this thing? I explain it some more. He says, I can't stop drinking. I can go like 2 months without it, and then I drink again, and it's killing my wife and my baby. Now, he's never heard of AA. They don't have AA in Morocco. And I get to take him through the first 3 steps of our program in the desert, and the man gets it, and we exchange emails. Now, I think I'm going to that desert to be adventurous. God says, no, I'm going to use you. He also says, you're going through a tough time, you're alone, scared, I'm going to help you as well. That's how my sobriety has been. I go on and on about those times. Signposts. When I am in the fire, or I am in the darkness, he's there. Right? So my life becomes abundant, and that's okay, right? And I'm traveling the world. I got the families back together. Man, and in 8 years of sobriety, I end up on my back with so much pain I can't even describe it. With a broken heart, and my best friend stabbed me in the back, took everything I owned and more, put me into bankruptcy. Worked for me for 4 years. And he robbed me for a year straight, and at the end he got me for everything. And then some. I got a broken heart, and I'm stabbed in the back. My business I built up for 7, 8 years, gone. I can't explain the pain. I can't explain the pain. All I can say is this, that I didn't want to drink, it's when I picked up Vance S. He taught me more about prayer, not to ask for the pain to go away, because he's been in the barrel over and over again with different things, and he learned how to say, thank you for the pain, it's a gift. I learned how to say, God, don't take the pain away from me, even though I kind of wanted it, but don't take it. Just let me know you're there. Right? And what happened is, as soon as that happened, right, this girl left and this business left, a new guy shows up. Been trying to get sober for 7 years all over the place, all over the East Coast. He lands, and I have all the time in the world to give him because I don't have a girlfriend, and I have no business. I'm spending 15 hours a day with this man. He's staying at my house sometimes. I fall in love with him. Right? He's just like me. He's 29. Man, the guy's been in jail his whole life, though. Never had a license, didn't have teeth. I helped him get all those things. Right? He's starting to clean up, look good, He got a job. He's sponsoring other guys, going through the steps. He's speaking. He started a meeting. They're still thriving. And I remember he carried me right out of that pain. I remember thinking, that's why that girl had to go in the business, because he needed me. Then I realized I had it backwards. I needed him. Yes. And in my time of darkness, at 8 years of sobriety, right, when it all came down, crumbling down on me, God put a new guy in my life to love. And I'm reminded again about what this is really about. I've come to really treasure. Now, I'm not at the point where I can't wait for hard things to happen in life to me, but I have come to look back and say I value the hard times in life more than the easy times. When I'm on a glacier in Iceland, which I've been above the clouds with my mom screaming, this is amazing, that feels good, but I don't learn up there. When I'm heartbroken, when I make another mistake, when I got to come to you with my tail between legs and say, be honest about how I'm feeling, when I end up risking something and losing it, man, I learn there. I learn in the fire, and I have more to offer because of it. It's the alchemy of God. I can't tell you, after the heartbreak and going through it again with the same girl and it hurting twice as hard and having to let her go again and then getting robbed, getting stabbed in the back again, right? Or my own self, putting myself in that position, which a year and a half ago, I was in a bad spot in fear, begging God, purging up fear in a fetal position, begging him, because I personally put myself there. I did not take care of the gifts that some of the gifts God gave me, and I put my head in the sand, and I had to deal with years of that neglect. And I finally did. Right? But I can't tell you how many times after that I'm with a new guy, and he says, I got a broken heart. He's a year sober. I've been there. I know how to get through that without drinking. You've been stabbed in the back by your best friend. I've been there. You're bankrupt in sobriety. I've been there. I can help you. I wouldn't have those experiences if I hadn't gone through what I've gone through. So I value those times more than anything because that's what molds me and makes me. And that to me is the joy of living, the whole spectrum of life I've been given in here. I'm going to end with a story. I have no idea how much time I have left, but I'm going to end with a story that I think is the essence of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I hope it never changes for me. I had a few years sober. I'm sitting in my home group, and there's this guy sharing with 8 months sober that he wants to drink, and his name's Haywood. And I heard what he said. I listened. And I went up to him afterwards. I said, Haywood, I heard what you were saying. I have answers if you want them. He had to go. And I gave him my number. I said, by the way, we have a Monday night meeting I'd like you to go to. He left. Monday came. He called me. He said, Scott, it's Haywood. I want to go to that meeting. He goes, you didn't think I was going to call you, did you? I said, I wasn't sure, bud. He goes, I want to go to that meeting. I said, be happy to take you. I go pick him up, take him to the meeting. 200 people. Every Monday night. An hour and a half, breaking the big book down, highlighters, pens, questions, answers, experience. I love this meeting. We started this, my friend and I, like 13 years ago. He's moving around. He's getting excited. After the meeting, everyone's shaking his hands, welcoming him in. On the way home, he says, Scott, what was that? I said, that was the big book coming alive, Haywood. He says, I love that group. He goes, would you sponsor me? I said, I'd be honored to. I said, why don't you meet me on Wednesday at the Greater Levittown group, which was my home group at the time. I said, and we'll start the steps. And he tells me that he almost drank over the weekend. I said, he said he had a pocket full of money. He was pacing the apartment, and he almost drank, but he thought about that Monday night meeting, and he wanted to go. I said, whoa, we better start the steps sooner, buddy, than Wednesday. I said, why don't you meet me tomorrow at noon? Because it was late. I get him home. Noon, I'm at the meeting. I see him coming in. He sees me. He smiles, bounces around over to me, sits down. We sit through the meeting. Afterwards, we go to lunch. He tells me his whole life story at lunch. This man's been through so much tragedy and abuse that I've never had to go through, but I listen to him. And he tells me his whole life story. It's tragic. And I buy him a burger and fries after, pay for his meal. And he says, what do you mean? I said, I'm paying for your meal. He goes, nobody ever bought me a meal. I'm like, what do you mean? It's not a big deal. He's 46 years old from down south. He said no one ever bought him a meal. I took him to my house after that meal, and back then it took me probably 2-3 hours to do a history 1, 2, and 3. I've since changed, but back then it was 3 hours. You're on step 4, and we're 5 hours in, and he can't admit he's powerless. And I'm like, I'm using examples out of the book. I'm pulling out of doctor's opinion, Bill's story, we agnostics, more about alcoholism. There's a solution, and he can't admit he's powerless. And it was getting late, but at my house, he said this like twice as we were talking, because he would want to tell me about his life, and I let him talk. He said, the earth will be yours and everything that's in it, but what's more is you'll be a man, my son. I said, what's this thing you say? He said, well, what we just talked about reminds me of a poem that had an impact on my life since I was a kid, and it's called If. So I go and I Google it, beautiful poem, but it was getting late, I had to get him home. So I'm driving him home, I give him another example of being powerless. He says, I see it, I'm powerless. I was surprised. I was like, oh, all right. So we look at step 2. Scott, how can there be a God when all these horrible things happen to me? I said, maybe that wasn't God, Haywood. Maybe that was people's self-will. He said, maybe. All right, maybe. We looked at step 3. We read the prayer together. I got to his front door. We sat there and talked a little bit about the principle behind step 3. Gave him the big book because he didn't have one. He goes out of my car. He goes up to his door. I'm pulling away. All here, Scott! I turn around. He's got his hand on the doorknob, my big book. Thank you. I said, you're welcome, bud. And I drove off. The next day, I get a phone call from his roommate. He said, Scott? I said, yeah. He said, it's Hayward's roommate. He passed away in his sleep last night. He died of cardiac arrest. Natural causes. But I got to tell you something. I lived with this man for 12 years. I never saw him this happy. He came home last night talking about how he loves his sponsor, how he can't wait to go back to that group you took him to, how he can't wait to go to the B.B. King concert with you because I invited him to the B.B. King concert. My mom and I were going, and it came up in conversation. He said, I love B.B. King. I said, you're welcome to come with us. Because that's how my life is an open invite to anyone that wants to come along. He said, I have your big book. I want to give it to you. Now, a tear came down my cheek because I thought this man had been robbed. That he had been robbed, taken before he got to experience what we do in this program. To go through these steps, have an awakening, help others, and go out there and do whatever you want in your life and make it beautiful. But then I realized that I had been given a gift. That in the last hours of this man's life, man, because of Alcoholics Anonymous, you allowed me to listen to him. When he shared about his life, you allowed me to be kind to him. You allowed me to take him into my home and read our big book with him. You allowed me to surrender and pray to God with him. I called my sponsor right away, who was John B. at the time. I said, John, I got to thank you for what you gave me, because you gave me something real to offer another man. I told him what happened. He said, Scott, I don't know if you'll ever have a more powerful experience, and that's exactly what that man needed to go on from here. That If poem hangs, it's framed and hangs in my office. And it's helped me in hard times more than anything. I continue to have a home group, a sponsor, have commitments in that home group, honored to have sponsees, give reverence to our traditions, our concepts, everything about Alcoholics Anonymous. I want to learn, be a part of, and be a better member tomorrow than I was today. I do all that stuff. But that If poem has helped me more than anything. Let me know God is there. I continue to learn more about it like I do our steps every single day. And I'll end with this. I was at the Vegas convention 6 months after my experience with Haywood. And the lady that spoke last that Sunday morning said this. And it was the last thing she said. She said, I used to think I should live every day like it's my last day on earth. I don't think that anymore. I think I should live every day like it's your last day on earth. And to me, that's what AA is all about. It's showing a guy like me that I missed it my whole life. That's why I ended up alone, wanting to die, hating myself, and could not stop drinking because it was all about me. What AA has done is slowly turn me around and show me and give me glimpses of that life is about what can I do for you? How can I serve something greater than me? What needs do you have? And when I live like that, I experience something that I never experienced. As good as alcohol seemed to feel at 16 and 17, it never allowed me to cry tears of joy. I cried tears of joy multiple times in here. I'll probably do it tonight. So I love Alcoholics Anonymous. I want to come back tomorrow. I hope that everyone up there that had anything to do with this gift got to my heart. Like Bill and Bob and Henrietta and Lois and Ann and Ernie G and Dr. Silkworth and on and on. All of them are up there saying that kid Scott down there is doing a pretty good job with the gift we left him. Thank you so much.
I have always been afraid of changes, but you show me life is full of faces. Sometimes clouds got in our favorite places, but we were young and unaware.
Oh, I got you, there's no reason to chasing payment on my own, 'cause you're here to stay every night.